Holy matrimony. This piece is called The Hesitant Fiancée, also known as The Reluctant Bride by Auguste Toulmouche. Hesitant? Reluctant? I don't know. If you ask me, this looks like pure rage. We're placed in a richly decorated parlor room. Our eyes are immediately drawn to a young bride seated toward the bottom center of the painting, bathed in a bright light coming from the opposite side of the room. Her head tilts down slightly, her brows furrow, and she looks directly at us. Anger and defiance burn in her eyes. Is she preparing for her wedding, or are we witnessing the aftermath? We can't really know for sure, but one thing is for certain. This is not what you're supposed to look like on your wedding day. Her hair is elegantly styled in a milkmaid braid that crowns the top of her head. A small bridal bouquet rests in her lap. She wears an elegant white satin gown that cascades down to the floor, the fabric pooling around a footstool, revealing her white satin shoes beneath. Two young women surround the bride. They appear to be around her age, perhaps her friends or her sisters. The woman on the bride's left, dressed in a red velvet gown, kneels on the ground and clasps her hand. The other leans over from above, gently holding the bride's right hand as she kisses her forehead. A shawl wraps around her blue satin gown. Her accessories are tossed onto the chair behind her. We can almost imagine her throwing them there as she rushed into the room to comfort the bride. Though the two girls seem to be trying to console her, the bride looks annoyed and exhausted. By everything. In the background, we see a young girl, perhaps the bride's younger sister. She's wearing the bride's headdress and admiring herself in the mirror, seemingly lost in thought, perhaps imagining her own wedding day far in the future. This girl might symbolize innocence or reflect how the reluctant bride once felt about marriage before fully realizing what she was getting herself into. The decor and the furniture are immaculate and expensive. An elaborate tapestry decorates the back wall and creates a frame around the three girls in the foreground. It seems to go on forever, accentuating the height of the ceiling. So the bride is clearly wealthy, or at least her family is. But we also know she's rich because of her white dress. Let me explain. The bride's gown is made of expensive silk and, as author Lucy Johnston notes, edged with wide bands of white Arctic fox, an expensive and luxurious fur which would have been trapped in the wild, most likely in northern Canada, and imported through London. Today, white dresses are synonymous with marriage, but this wasn't always the case. The trend of the white wedding dress began when Queen Victoria wore one for her wedding to Prince Albert in 1840, although it took time for the style to catch on. At the time this painting was created, only wealthy brides typically wore white. Johnston also adds, more and more women opted for white, as it implied purity, cleanliness, and social refinement. The less well-off or more practically minded opted for pale blue, dove gray, or fawn, which they could wear for special occasions long after the event. Auguste Toulmouche unveiled this piece at the 1866 Paris Salon, where it was originally titled The Marriage of Convenience. This gives us a crucial hint. The young bride is likely being forced into an arranged marriage. While arranged marriages were becoming less common by this time, they still occurred, especially among the wealthy. This means that the bride's parents likely chose her husband for her, and she probably didn't get much of a say, if any. So, is that glare really directed at us or her parents? Auguste Toulmouche was famous for painting upper-class women lounging in lavish domestic settings, draped in luxurious gowns. There's a good chance you've never heard of him, but he was actually pretty popular when he was alive. But not everyone was a fan. In fact, some thought of his art as elegant trifles, frivolous, hollow. Émile Zola called the women he painted Toulmouche's delicious dolls. Another critic remarked that the women he depicted, quote, have no brains. In some ways, The Hesitant Fiancée fits right in with his other works, but in other ways, it doesn't. This bride doesn't seem like a mindless, decorative figure. She appears to have a brain, and it looks like she's using it to think of ways to burn the entire place to the mother ground. Sorry. Conjecture. Auguste Toulmouche was born into a wealthy family in Nantes, France in 1829, and he made his debut at the Paris Salon when he was only 19. He would go on to win medals at the Salon in 1852 and 1861. He married Marie Lecadre, Claude Monet's cousin, and his influence on Monet's art career cannot be understated. Toulmouche introduced Monet to his first art instructor who taught him in the academic style, though Monet eventually rejected that formal approach, paving the way for what we now know as Impressionism, and Monet would go on to become the founder of the Impressionist movement. Despite the rise in Impressionism, Toulmouche remained committed to his luxurious genre scenes. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Wrong. Because the rise in Impressionism is precisely what caused Toulmouche's popularity to plummet. We may never truly know why Toulmouche created this painting. Perhaps he was reflecting on a broader cultural shift away from arranged marriages. Maybe he sensed that his career was on the rocks, and he wanted to do something a little unexpected to shake things up. Maybe he was just telling the world how he really felt. From the limited information available on the critical response when this painting was exhibited in 1866, it seems to have been met with, a mild acceptance. Art critic Felix Jaer wrote about it. Submerged in a melancholic daydream, she reveals regret for the past and a vague worry about the future. While she abandons her thoughts to 1,000 concerns whose exact meaning escapes her, 2 of her friends try to detach her from her dark ideas. To really grasp why her eyes burn with more intensity than Dante and Virgil in the 8th circle of hell, we need to revisit some of the harsher realities of marriage in the 1860s. Under the Napoleonic Civil Code of 1804, married women were legally treated as minors. This meant that any property, assets, or income a woman brought into the marriage automatically became her husband's. On top of that, she might soon find herself pregnant at a time when childbirth was far more dangerous and potentially life-threatening for women. Even if she survived, both she and her child would legally belong to her husband. Adding to this, divorce was illegal in France during the 1860s. While these marriage dynamics weren't unique to France, it seems like Toulmouche may have been specifically criticizing his own country. The dresses of the 3 girls in The Hesitant Fiancée form the colors of the French flag, which might be a subtle way of throwing shade at the nation's oppressive marriage laws. But if the institution of marriage was so terrible for women, why didn't they just opt out of it altogether? Charlotte Despard wrote about her experience as a young woman in the mid-19th century. Although she claims to have come from a different social class than the bride in Toulmouche's painting, her words shed light on the mindset of the time. She writes, "It was a strange time, unsatisfactory, full of ungratified aspirations. I longed ardently to be of some use in the world. But as we girls with a little money and born into a particular social position, it was not thought necessary that we should do anything but amuse ourselves until the time and opportunity of marriage came along. Better any marriage at all than none, a foolish old aunt used to say. The woman of the well-to-do classes was made to understand early that the only door open to a life at once easy and respectable was that of marriage. Therefore, she had to depend upon her good looks, according to the ideals of the men of her day, her charm, her little drawing-room arts. At the time, marriage was often the only socially acceptable path for women to create a stable life, as working outside the home was frowned upon. From an early age, women were encouraged to focus on securing a husband, cultivating traits like passivity, improving their domestic skills, and enhancing their physical appearance. Toulmouche also created another intriguing painting titled The Forbidden Fruit, which was a bit daring for him. In this piece, 4 young girls sneak into a library to secretly learn about sex. something forbidden, as women were expected to be taught about such things by their husbands. When this painting was exhibited in 1865, art critic Paul Mance summed up the dominant view of the time, saying, "I do not approve of these silly girls. Instead of searching the forbidden pages for the knowledge they lack, they would do better to leave tomorrow's lover the pleasure of instructing them on the matters of which they are ignorant." All of this to say, Toulmouche could have used this painting to shame the girls, but I don't think he does. In my eyes, it seems like he chose to empathize with their curiosity and humanize them. And I see this same approach when I look at his other paintings. Like this one. A woman is admiring herself in a mirror. He could have criticized her vanity, but he doesn't. Instead, it's like he's saying, of course she's looking at herself. Wouldn't you? The forbidden fruit was painted just a year before The Hesitant Fiancée, and art historian Catherine Brown suggests a connection between the two. She proposes that the same girls from The Forbidden Fruit appear in The Hesitant Fiancée, where we now see one of them on the verge of marriage, realizing what lies ahead. There's a striking contrast between the bride's intense gaze and her slumped, lifeless posture, almost as if she's chained to the chair by shackles disguised as fox fur, kisses, and hand-holding. It kind of reminds me of what it feels like to conform to societal expectations that we don't truly agree with. These subtle, often unspoken norms form our understanding of how we should act, who we should be, and even how we should think. They influence us quietly, but can bind us as powerfully as the strongest chains. A lot has changed in the past century and a half, and will likely continue to change. The way we view marriage will probably keep evolving. Maybe one day brides will wear green dresses instead of white. And while the pressures that weigh heavy on us might shift over time, I have a feeling that the look on her face will stay forever relatable.